Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapiyat Sarvam, Trailokyam Sacharacharam, Tatpadam Darshitam Yena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Bhagawan explaining to us the essence of Ashtanga Yoga and by what practices we can quickly and easily bring our mind to a state of quietude, absorption, laya, and it is in such a mind that contemplation becomes conducive. Bhagavan points out that Vayu Rodhanat Liyate Manaha. By regulating our breathing, the mind can be taken to the state of absorption or laya. Laya is a temporary state of quietude of the mind. However, by the regulation of breath, when the mind is taken to the state of quietude, it is a temporary state, even though that state of quietude is wonderful, but the cause of our fluctuating mind, as well as those vasanas, desires, which are born of our ignorance, are not eliminated. Therefore, Jala Pakshivad Rodha Sadhanam. This type of control of mind is like putting a bird in the cage. As long as the doors of the cage are closed, the bird remains contained. But the moment the door of the cage opens, the bird flies away. Same thing, while you are doing pranayama, and for some time the mind remains in that cage. But the moment that control over the mind through the pranas is let loose or left open, the mind comes back with its full force. And that's why we find people who, having controlled their mind by some means, external means, later on the mind actually blows up even more violently, just as a volcano. Now, what is the principle behind this regulation of the breath and the quietening of the mind, Bhagavan gives us the explanation so that we understand that how through breath regulation, pranayama, we can quieten or regulate our mind. However, we have to remember that this is also temporary. But having reached that state of quietude, we have to lead or bring the mind under our mastery by going to the very cause of the eruption of the mind. Bhagavan explains, Chittavayavas Chitkriya Yuta Shakayordvai Shakti Mulaka Chittavayavas Chitkriya Yuta Shakayordvai Shakti Mulaka Shakayordvai Shakti Mulaka. Chitta, mind, Vayavaha, breath or vital airs, Chit Kriya Yuta, our pranas and our mind, both are vitalized by the consciousness. But in prana, it gives the prana the capacity to create activity, to energize. And in the mind, it gives the faculty of knowing, cognition, in the senses and the mind. So you will find that activity is provided by the energy given out by the prana. So prana is activated because of the sentiency that is lent by the consciousness, as well as the capacity to know in the mind also is there because of the consciousness. Therefore, Bhagavan explains that consciousness as prana creates activity as though, and in the mind, the subtle equipment, the capacity to know. And therefore, Shakayordvai Shakti Mulaka. Prana and mind are like two branches, but its root is the same Shakti. The Maya Shakti of Ishvara is the root through which, when this consciousness is illumining the mind and the pranas, pranas develop activities or energizes activities or makes activity possible, and in the mind it makes knowing possible. And since both these branches are linked together, there is a common link between prana and mind, because the root Shakti, the root power, is Maya Shakti endowed with consciousness. When we know that there is this connection, And also we can experience it directly, that our mind and of course all our pranas, but since we can recognize breath very clearly, quite visibly, therefore if we watch that when certain emotions rise in the mind, or when the mind is agitated, our breathing also becomes erratic. When the mind is calm, like you can observe right now, you hardly feel your breath. The breath is harmonious. Notice when somebody is angry, and later on when you are angry, you have something like a dragon breath. Thus, when the mind goes through its various moods, agitations, emotions, and especially when there are extreme emotions, you will find the breath different. Therefore, the great masters knew this link between the mind and the breath, between the subtle and the gross. In the same way, the gross can also influence the subtle. Even as children, we are told that if you are angry or you are fearful, take some deep, slow breath. As you control your breathing, so also your mind gets controlled. This is the principle behind pranayama, that you regulate your breath to become harmonious. And just as we explained in the asanas, same way, what is the purpose of pranayama? The purpose of pranayama is to regulate your breath in such a way that it becomes natural and harmonious. These days, because of the lifestyle that we live, also due to the pollution, etc., most of us have got shallow breathing. I do not know about you, but I feel it myself. We have shallow breathing, very often living under stress and anxiety. You will find your breathing also erratic. And therefore, a regular practice of pranayama not only regulates our breathing to vitalize our body with not only good health, but vitality, energy, but at the same time, if the breathing is harmonious, the mind also becomes calm. This calm mind is where our intelligence can function. Those of you in the last couple of last sessions online that we had, particularly on Gayatri Mantra, we had explained that how the mantra helps to quieten the mind. And when you say Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat, intellect is also made up of thoughts. But when the mind is calm, memory is clear, intellect is sharp, and we are able to discriminate properly. In simple words, when the mind is calm, we can think clearly. Therefore, in that quiet mind, knowledge is possible. So even if we take our mind to this state of laya, in that calmness or quietude of mind, the intellect starts functioning clearly, dynamically, with brilliance. Also, it gives us the confidence that that peace that we are seeking is with us, and in that quiet state also we feel a quiet, unagitated, undisturbed happiness also. Even though this is a temporary state of mind, it gives us that confidence, that peace, when we say is within us. These are only words. Even what we have been studying, the various practices, merely understanding them is not enough. Certain sadhanas have to be done and practiced. The truth has to be just known with a clear, pure intellect. So these have to be practiced to see its efficacy. You don't even have to have belief. You just practice it and you can experience it. This pranayama has to be practiced through proper discipline and knowledge. Inhalation, puraka, and exhalation, rechaka, and holding the breath, kumbhaka. The rishis have pointed out this to be done in various combinations, even some through different nostrils, even some through the mouth. So different types of breath has different effect on the body and the mind. This is all to correct our breathing, and eventually the goal is to bring the breath to its natural, harmonious, rhythmic state. And in such a state, the mind remains calm. That is the goal. Again, a warning that pranayama should not, because you're releasing a lot of energy, done wrongly can be very harmful. And this is not to frighten but to caution. Certain simple practices you can do, but Ramana Maharshi and some of the great masters have warned against practicing without proper guidance, but at the same time, we may not get this kind of guidance. What is the easiest, natural, effortless, and by which there can be no side effects, no harm? And that technique pointed out by Ramana Maharshi and our Puja Gurudev Swami Chinmayananda used to tell us to practice as pranayama only this method, because it is natural. It's called as prana vikshanam. And that is that when you are sitting quietly in your meditative pose, just watch your breath. After you have kept your body steady and relaxed, just watch your breath. Now, one will say, by just watching our breath, it is a very simple technique, and what is simple becomes very difficult for us, because we have got ourselves so entangled with complicated things that until unless we do something complicated, we are not focused. And something that is simple, we allow our mind to drift. Now herein the principle is that you keep your mind watching your breath. Now when you are watching your breath, first of all, it gives your mind a preoccupation, something at first to do. And when you are watching your breath, again, breath, which is very natural to us, is not associated with any thought or memory. So what happens is, otherwise, even if you take a name or you have a certain thought, there are link thoughts that start getting created. Sometimes even with japa, which of course we do because we have seen that besides just making the mind quiet and single pointed, because the ideal related with japa is so great that it brings about virtues and purity of mind. But just as you might be thinking about Shiva, 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 and then suddenly you start thinking, Arey, that Shivram, he borrowed 10 rupees from me or $10 from me and has not returned to me even for the last 10 months. And what will he do with the 10 rupees? It's hardly anything, but you're disturbing your mind. And yet he goes on a trip and he goes to London, Paris, but nowadays we can't travel, COVID is going on, and I do not know how many illnesses are taking place. When will they come with the vaccine? And this vaccine also will be a big scandal, and the scandal nowadays, there's so much corruption even in any field. See how the link of thoughts go on? And by the time you bring the mind back, the mind has probably traveled round the world zigzag a number of times. But since breath is not associated with anything, very easily the mind is brought to quietude. So, the link with the breath. Then when you watch your breath, and please practice it today itself, and make it part of your daily practice. Otherwise, we know all these techniques and we've got a lot of knowledge. Oh, this we have also heard before also. But till we practice it, we do not experience what these practices bring about in our mind. So, when you practice watching, witnessing your breath, not only you're training yourself later on for your contemplation, but the beauty is, just as you watch your breath, at first some of you might feel uneasy. Some of you will recognize that you need to grasp for air because your breathing has been very shallow. If you bring your attention to your breath, in due course, the breath corrects itself and start becoming harmonious. Just like a naughty child, when someone is watching and knows that someone is watching, immediately starts behaving. Same way also, the pranas, when you watch, effortlessly you will be able to correct this prana. There is some adjusting moments, but you just watch. Don't try to breathe hard or change your breathing. Let the pranas get corrected naturally. And by this method, that which is the goal of pranayama, that gets achieved so easily, and that is that the mind enters into a state of absorption, laya. But we should not just be in that state alone. It is a temporary state, that's why it's being pointed out. It's quite an elevated state, but we have to take our mind to higher levels of understanding, of contemplation, of meditation. Now, Ramana Maharshi points out the two methods of, and as you see, throughout we are going up, two methods of puja, and all this being pointed out, two types of contemplation with distinctions, with oneness, all this. So he points out two types of mind mastery or mind control. One is through breath or pranas, and the other is controlling the mind through contemplation. So therefore, he points out, Laya vinashane ubhayarodhane laya gatam punar bhavati no mritam. Laya vinashane ubhayarodhane laya gatam punar bhavati no mritam. Laya gatam punar bhavati no mritam. Bhagavan says, Ubhaya Rodhane. These are the two methods of restraining. One is called as Laya, other is called as Vinasha. One is the temporary absorption of the mind in silence, and the second is the dissolving of the mind. It is called as Vinasha. This word Vinasha is a technical term which in its literal meaning means that Vinash, destruction. Now when we hear the word destruction of the mind, we do not want the mind to be destroyed. How will we function in the world? Immediately such anxieties come up. But here Vinash means that the very cause that creates the agitations, the projections, the likes, the dislikes, the desires, its consequent anxieties, sorrows, when its cause, the ignorance itself is destroyed, and there is the destruction of the vasanas itself, that mind, which is the problematic mind, in which comes all these delusions, agitations, that problematic mind is destroyed, dissolved. Not our perceiving mind. So, there are two methods, one which takes the mind to absorption, laya, a temporary state of quietude, and the other is where the very cause of the sorrow and agitation of the mind itself is destroyed, and therefore the mind enters into its natural state, which is silence. And when the mind gets absorbed in that silence, the mind, like the salt doll in the ocean, gets dissolved. And Bhagavan says, Laya gatam punarbhavati. That mind which has gone to the state of laya manifests back again, as we explained, with all its force, but not which is mritam. Naumritam. Not one which has gone into dissolution, which is dissolved. The mind which has merged with the bliss, merged with the peace, merged with the Supreme Self, the mind which has dissolved into bliss. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.